One person we'll speak to is Oliver Kamm, who's
Good morning.
from the Times. Hello, Oliver. I mean, what do you make of this whole inquiry?
I have no criticism of the inquiry or the members of the inquiry who are distinguished public servants and academics. I do think that the inquiry itself ought not to be taking place because there have already been several inquiries, the Hutton inquiry, the Butler inquiry and 2 parliamentary inquiries. All it's doing is recovering old ground when we know that there are many people who passionately disagree with Tony Blair's decision to commit British troops to the overthrow of Saddam Hussein. And in my view, these successive inquiries are not really germane to the political decision that he took. They are a quasi-judicial way of trying to get at him, and these are not really issues of great constitutional moment. They are a vehicle for the Hate Tony Blair Brigade.
OK, come back in a second. I will just joined momentarily, I think, by Peter Brearley, who lost his son, Lance Corporal Sean Brearley, in Iraq. Hello, Peter, are you hearing me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah, you believe very strongly you are one of the people who thinks that Tony Blair, frankly, is a war criminal, don't you? Why do you say that?
Because the evidence that's been given, especially the things being released earlier on by Lord Goldsmith, says that he went against the advice. He went to Lord Goldsmith and asked for advice on whether it was legal to go to war. And they've always said that that it was. We've seen the advice. We disagreed with them. Lord Goldsmith now seems to be saying that he advised him not, and he wasn't following what he'd been told.
When we initially went to war, what were your feelings about it?
Well, I 100% believed what I was being told.
So you were for it initially, but you've changed your mind.
Well, no, I wasn't for it, but I believed what were happening. I believe that we were being. Sorry, I believe that we were under threat of the weapons of mass destruction.
Weapons of mass destruction, yeah, and 45 minutes and those particular claims.
I believed that, and I was proud my son was going to fight for his country, but he wasn't. When I found out that he wasn't, which is when I started my campaigning.
Oliver, thank you very much, Peter. Oliver, what about the Lord Goldsmith inconsistencies that people are pointing out?
May I first correct you on one, or amplify one very important point? I have great sympathy with Mr. Brearley on the loss of his son, who I think was killed in a road accident in Kuwait. But Mr. Brearley is not your typical anti-war campaigner. He's affiliated with an organisation called Military Families Against the War, which is organised by the Socialist Workers' Party, the mainstay of the Stop the War coalition. The Socialist Workers' Party is not anti-war, it is pro-war on the other side. It wanted Saddam Hussein to defeat British troops, and it supports what it calls the resistance in Iraq, that is, the people who are attacking British troops. And I won't take any criticisms of Tony Blair from people like that, an alliance of those who support the one God, the Islamists, and those who support the one-party state, the Trotskyites. Now, what was your question again?
The question was about the apparent inconsistency. I mean, you make a point that has been made by some of our listeners, and I thank you for that. But the point was about the apparent inconsistencies, the reported inconsistencies between Lord Goldsmith's advice and what Tony Blair did.
Well, these were extraordinary circumstances in which it would be amazing to me if several years on, Tony Blair had perfect recollection of all the decisions that were taken and all the circumstances in which he took them. The idea that there is some sort of gotcha uncovering a conspiracy at the heart of government in order to deceive the British people and commit British troops to combat is frankly ludicrous. The inquiry is one more episode in which an essentially political decision is being attacked by apolitical means, and I think that's wrong.
With hindsight, was Tony Blair right to do what he did?
In my view, he was, for the reasons that he said in the snippet that you broadcast a few minutes ago. The calculation of security after 9/11 had changed. We know that Saddam Hussein would have withstood a containment regime because the containment regime was threadbare. And we know that the oil for food program was being circumvented so that he could do pretty much anything he liked. And either we would have had a war in the future against him at a time of his choosing, or a war when we chose at a time when it was best possible to overthrow him. In my view, Tony Blair was right to take that decision, but even if you disagree, it was a political decision that was the prerogative of government, and successive inquiries are uncovering no new facts and really ought not to be taking place.
Oliver, listen to a quick point from Jay in Sydney, who in Australia, who makes a point some put forward. Hello, Jay. Do it quickly if you could.
Yes, basically, I'd like to really, for Tony Blair to come forward and admit quite openly that whilst it was pretty clear that he knew it and the rest of the colleagues, in the UK and in the States knew that Saddam Hussein wasn't a threat, Iraq wasn't a threat, but the inability for him not to be forthcoming with access to oil would have put us in a precarious position.
So you think it was about oil?
I don't think there's any doubt about that. I think if you look at how much, if you look at this kind of contracts that have secured the oil in that country, you can see there was certainly a lot of money to make there.
Oliver, what about that theory, which we hear a lot?
Well, Tony Blair won't come forward and admit that, as your caller suggests, because it's a ludicrous remark by someone who patently hasn't put the faintest clue about the recent history of the region.
Expand on that. It's interesting because we hear this a lot, don't we? This is from Michael Moore onwards.
Well, Michael Moore I once described him as sort of brown shit political campaigner. He's really not a credible authority on this whatsoever. Patently, Iraq is a strategically important state and it's an economically important state. It would be quite absurd if its economic importance were not taken into account in a decision of what Western strategic interests are. But we know for a fact why Saddam Hussein was targeted militarily. It was that he launched aggressive and often suicidal, near-suicidal wars, even to the point of invading, annexing and plundering a neighbouring state and a member of the United Nations.
Oliver, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Quick weather. It's 11 minutes past 9 o'clock. Ray's in Northampton, Catherine's in Swindon. Hello, Catherine. Hello.
Good morning.
Hello, Ray. And
Hello.
John Rentoul joins us as well, who's broadly speaking, a supporter of Tony Blair. Is that right in saying, John? Is that fair?
On balance, I think, yes.
On balance, yeah, OK.
I take the same position about Tony Blair that I've always taken, which is that on balance he's a good thing. That is now regarded as an extremist Blairite ultra position, but there you go.
Catherine, what do you want to say?
Well, I recall it was all in the newspapers, front headlines, that there was a threat that water in our lakes, Lake Vyrnwy, etc., that provides water, I think, for Manchester and a lot of England, was going to be poisoned by the Iraqis. And people were going into supermarkets and getting loads of bottled water. I had it all behind my sofa, behind my chairs, in my sitting room, in the shed.
Well, I don't remember this.
It was. I am telling you, that is a threat that we were told about, and it obviously was not true. I think this was before the weapons of mass destruction. So really, we were just being totally and utterly softened up.
Were we being softened up?
And it's terrorism. We were being terrorised. We, the British people, were being terrorised.
Ray in Northampton, do you feel we were being softened up?
Well, there's 2 points I'd like to make. One is a sense of frustration that we're having yet another inquiry. I feel is sort of picking over old wounds. But if I had to ask one question of Tony Blair, it would be, does he have any thoughts about what might have happened to the weapons of mass destruction? Does he think they might have been smuggled out of the country, taken to Syria, as some other sources of information? I think his Air Force commander, some Christian Iraqi, has alleged that actually there were weapons of mass destruction, but they were actually smuggled out of the country. And that's one question I've never had answered to my satisfaction.
John Rentoul, the language changed from weapons of mass destruction to weapons of mass destruction programme, or the language, but the emphasis changed, didn't it?
Well, it changed as it... you mean after it
emerged there were none?
Well, after it emerged they were going to be difficult to find, yes.
Well, they might have been smuggled out, as I said.
But, I mean, sorry, but this is all a distraction from the actual reasons for going to war, which was Saddam's failure to comply with UN resolutions which were designed to prevent him acquiring weapons of mass destruction. Now, of course, it's very difficult to prove a negative, but there is no doubt, nobody disagrees that Saddam Hussein was not complying with UN resolutions at the time of the invasion, and that's the issue. The whole question about weapons of mass destruction, which turned out to be a deception on Saddam's part, although he may indeed have had them and spirited them away, but the whole question of weapons of mass destruction was a deception on Saddam's part, not a deception on Tony Blair's part.
Jeremy Corbyn, Labour MP, is in Parliament Square to respond to that, hopefully. Good morning, Jeremy Corbyn.
Good morning.
Did you hear that point there by John Rentoul?
Yes.
How would you respond to it?
Yes, I did. Well, the issue is quite simply this, that Tony Blair claimed there were weapons of mass destruction that weren't.
Now, I've just said that that's not what the issue was.
Well, the weapons inspectors went to Iraq, ensured and reported that there weren't any further weapons of mass destruction.
No, they didn't.
Blair persisted with that argument.
Does he not think there might have been smuggled out to Syria?
Hang on, Ray. Let's get this. Let's get this established. But okay, state your case again, John Rentoul. You said it was all about not complying with the UN resolution, John Rentoul. That's what you said.
Yes. The question was whether Saddam was complying with the requirements put upon him by the United Nations, and he wasn't. And Hans Blix, the weapons inspector, said that he wasn't in full compliance, and he said that there were some serious weapons that were still being discovered, and Saddam Hussein had been playing games for 14 years by that stage.
December 2002, Hans Blix reported that he thought all weapons of mass destruction had either been destroyed or were no longer in existence, as did Mohammed al-Baradei. Blair and Bush then refused to allow the weapons inspectors teams back into Iraq in January 2003. 2 months later, we were at war. 500,000 people have died as a result of that. Is that really a good idea?
Jeremy, there's no need to exaggerate the death toll in order to make your case. The anti-war case is strong enough without having to spread wild exaggerations around. Far too many people have died. The post-war situation has not gone well, but you don't need to exaggerate. The point is, Saddam Hussein was not in compliance with the United Nations. The question is, what were we going to do about it? Were we going to just dither around and allow him to play games for the foreseeable future, or was it finally going to be put a stop to?
If you follow that line, then you would go to war almost willy-nilly, look at the results of this war, look at the damage to civil liberties on both sides of the Atlantic, and
what
the
damage
to the stature of this country. The sanctions were being applied, negotiations were going on, the UN General Secretary went there. Why did we have to go to war other than for the vanity, particularly of President Bush?
Well, if that's what if you think that the invasion of Iraq was about George Bush's vanity, then I'm afraid you're a sad, deluded person, because there are serious
about it. I'm not going to be personally offensive to you.
There are serious issues of national security involved.
There are extremely serious issues involved. A large number of people have died. A lot of money has been spent. The world is not a safer place, and you have to ask yourself the question, is this then going to be done again in Iran or somewhere else in the world, or are we going to look to a peaceful way of resolving difficulties?
If you think the only reason that George Bush did this was because he's a vain man, then I think that's just to reduce history to an incredible personalisation and simplification.
I don't think that's the only reason. I think it's
you think it's probably
about
oil
power.
as well?
No, hang on a minute. It's partly about American power. It's partly about resources. Look at the Project for New American Century. Look at the thinking behind Bush and his administration at that time.
I mean, the people who were concerned to spread democracy around the world.
What democracy has been spread around the world by these wars?
Well,
because you have to look at the... Well, hang on a minute. You have to look at the situation in Iraq. You have to look at the destruction of life and so on in Iraq. You also have to ask yourself some questions. Those people that were very keen to go to war in Iraq were remarkably quiet during the 1980s over the arming of Iraq by Britain and other countries at that time.
Gentlemen, I think his appearance is imminent.
They decided a different course.
Thank you. Jeremy Corbyn, thank you very much for talking to us this morning. And
you're welcome.
And likewise, John Rentoul.
My pleasure.
It's fascinating listening to those opposing views being aired.